This online webinar is the latest in the series of monthly webinars that form part of the 4 Million Homes programme. I think it's very important that we're discussing this particular topic today, which is the 4 new and updated draft consumer standards that the Regulator of Social Housing has recently published and is running a consultation on until the 17th of October. We will have details at the end of the session on the screen about how you can respond to the consultation formally. These standards are proposed for introduction from April of next year, and it is really important that residents express their opinions through the consultation. I'm pleased that today we've got 2 speakers here who are very centrally involved in the consultation process. Mila Simpson, the Strategy Manager at the Regulator of Social Housing, and her colleague Fleur Priest-Stephen will both be speaking and presenting first up, relating to the new proposed standards. They'll then take the opportunity for you to make any comments or ask any questions of them before we then move on to John Harris. John is the chair of the Cornwall Housing Tenants Forum, and John is going to give us the perspective that tenants down in Cornwall have relating to the standards. And then after that, Fleur and Mila will be leaving the session so that we can then have a session just with yourselves as residents to open things up and allow you to express your opinions in whatever way you feel like. That part of the session we will not be publishing on the website. I want to give people the opportunity to speak freely, but speak freely in a way that they know is then going to be packaged up and stuck on websites or social media. We will also be asking a series of polling questions during that session that relate to the consultation questions that the regulator has published as part of the consultation. So I hope that you find today's session interesting and informative, and an opportunity for you to ask any questions of our colleagues here from the regulator that are relevant to you. So can I now introduce then our first speakers, Mila Simpson and Fleur Priest-Stephen from the Regulator of Social Housing.
Thanks very much for inviting us to speak today about our proposed consumer standards. As Blaise said, there are 4 of them that are currently out for consultation, and we're really keen to hear, as many views as possible about whether these are going to set the right expectations from landlords going forward from April 2024. So what I thought I could cover today is a little bit about the background to the standards and how they've been developed, then go into a bit more detail about the what each standard covers, as well as a draft code of practice that we'll also be publishing, before going on to give you a bit of information about how you can respond to the consultation. Okay, can everyone see the next slide? So in terms of the background, we had the Social Housing Green Paper that was published in August 2018, and that was obviously in direct response to the tragic fire at Grenfell Tower. Following on from that, we had the Social Housing White Paper that was published in late 2020, and that set out the actions that government proposed to take to ensure that residents were safe in their homes, that they were listened to, that they lived in good quality homes, and that they had access to redress when things, if things go wrong. Then in July of this year, we had the Social Housing Regulation Act that received royal assent, and that strengthens the powers of us as a regulator in terms of our consumer regulation role. And so this will see us delivering an enhanced consumer regulation. Is that okay? Everything okay? Where we will more routinely assess that landlords are meeting the consumer standards from April next year. So, it's key, as I said, that we get these expectations right, so that we can strengthen the accountability of landlords for providing safe homes, quality services, and treating tenants with fairness and respect, and that they understand the diverse needs of the communities that they serve, so that services are accessible, and that where things go wrong, they have robust complaint systems in place so that they can handle those complaints effectively and put things right. So this slide covers a little bit about what we've taken into account when developing the standards. We've been guided by 3 key tests. So our overall approach to consumer regulation, we want to ensure that it's a benefit to tenants, that it will be deliverable by landlords, and that we as a regulator will be able to regulate it. So we've kind of taken all of these things on board to come out with a set of expectations that landlords must meet. We've also borne a number of other things in mind, that the primary relationship is between the landlord and tenants, that standards are outcome-based as far as possible. So that recognises that different landlords will have different approaches to achieving the same outcomes of expectations. And so, they must be broad to be able to capture those different approaches. We believe that the current consumer standards cover much of the right areas, and so we've worked to build on those and make sure that they're up to date and fit for purpose. We also had a number of expectations set of us in the social housing white paper, and so we wanted to ensure that these draft standards captured those all of those expectations. There'll also be a number of other areas that come through from government. So, they will include things like professionalisation, so ensuring that the staff that work for landlords are competent. There will be things around the quality of accommodation. So, in terms of the review that government are doing on the Decent Home Standard. So, we're consulting on a proposed draft now, but there will be other changes as well to come. And finally, we have a very specific role that's set out in legislation that, our standards relate to the nature, extent and quality of accommodation and the services that landlords deliver. And so we've worked hard to ensure that what we are proposing meets with our legal obligations. Sorry, So, as I say, we've taken the time to develop a draft set of consumer standards and a code of practice. And in part of that process, we've taken into the views of stakeholders, and we've spoken to, over 2,000 tenants over the last couple of years. As mentioned, we have reviewed our existing standards, which included us undertaking an equality impact assessment. So we've assessed our current standards and we've assessed our proposed standards to understand the potential impact on tenants, hopefully that these standards will have a positive impact. We've also tested our draft standards with a small number of stakeholders, and then we published them in July for wider consultation. So we're now at the point where we're seeking views from stakeholders, from residents on our proposals to ensure that we are setting the right requirements of landlords and that we expand on them in a way that is helpful to tenants in the code of practice. So looking ahead, what we're proposing are 4 new consumer standards. We have a safety and quality standard, and if you're familiar with our current consumer standards, that covers much of the same area as our home standard. So it covers aspects of safety, the quality of homes, repairs and maintenance, influence and accountability standard, and that builds on our existing tenant involvement and empowerment standard. What we've hoped to achieve there is to strengthen expectations on transparency and accountability of landlords, and that landlords treat tenants with fairness and respect. We also have a neighbourhood and community standard and a tenancy standard. So the titles of these standards remain the same, but we have done work to kind of review and update those standards. So if I kind of give you a whistle-stop tour now through each of the proposed standards. So as I say, we've got the safety and quality standard. That covers 5 core sets of requirements. So we have decency and repairs and maintenance, and they're areas that are in our existing standards. We also have, so in terms of decency, government set policy on the standard of homes, and they do that through the Decent Home Standard. And so we're waiting for government to finish their review of the Decent Home Standard, and then the standards will be updated to reflect those. We've got our proposed repairs, maintenance and planned improvement requirements. And so with these requirements, we've aimed to be more tenant focused. So we've got a greater emphasis on landlord having good communication with tenants and keeping tenants informed as repairs progress. Our current home standard talks about right first time repairs, but we've moved away from that in what we're proposing, because we understand that, you know, different landlords will measure right first time repairs in different ways. So here what we're expecting is that landlords deliver an effective and efficient repair service, that they're clear with tenants on timescales for repairs, that they've taken tenants' needs into account, and that that's informed the timescales that they set. We also are focusing on stock quality. So, you know, we've been saying for quite some time to landlords that they really need to have good data, understand the condition of their properties. And so now we're, you know, putting a requirement in our standards to ensure that landlords are doing this, and that they use that information to ensure that homes are safe, that they're well maintained. We've also got in this standard some proposals around health and safety. So we're proposing to make it clear that where providers do a health and safety assessment of a property, so for example, gas checks or what have you, that they ensure that any actions that arise from those assessments are undertaken, you know, within set timescales. We then are giving greater prominence to adaptations in these standards. So we talked about adaptations in our current standards, but we are kind of raising the profile of them in the proposed standards, and we are expecting that landlords assist tenants to you know, access adaptation services where they need them, and that they, you know, don't unnecessarily or unreasonably refuse for an adaptation to take place. So transparency and accountability standard, we're proposing that this will replace the tenant involvement and empowerment standard that we currently have. You know, addressing issues of engagement, transparency and accountability will really come through the social housing white paper. So if I take you through some of our proposals, you know, we are clear in the standard that, you know, landlords must treat tenants with fairness and respect. You know, this is key to this standard, but it's key to the delivery of all the requirements across all four standards, and we expect that to reflect, you know, the culture of the organisation. We've strengthened requirements in relation to diverse needs of tenants. So here we're expecting tenants to collect and use data about, you know, tenants' needs, and use this to make sure that services are accessible, that tenants' needs are taken into account, and that people have, you know, equity of opportunity and outcomes in terms of accessing services from their landlord. In terms of engagement with tenants, government recently consulted on some requirements that we have now placed in our standards, and this is about tenants being supported by their landlord to scrutinise their strategy, scrutinise their services, and have, you know, some influence on how these services are delivered. In terms of information about landlord services, you know, we've heard from tenants for our engagement how important landlords providing clear and timely communication is to tenants. We think it helps demonstrate that culture of fairness and respect, and you know, it can help tenants hold their landlords to account if they have the information that they need. So our proposed standards set out that providers must provide tenants with information about their services, their standards, rent and service charges, and their responsibilities as a landlord. Landlords are also expected to provide tenants with performance information. So this standard includes the requirements on tenant satisfaction measures that you may be familiar with, where landlords are undertaking surveys, providing performance information, and ensuring that tenants have access to all of that information. In terms of complaints, our proposed requirements work alongside the Housing Ombudsman Service, setting expectations about how landlords should handle complaints and ensure that they have really strong processes for the handling of complaints. And then finally, we've set a requirement that all landlords must make a referral to the regulator where they identify any material issues that indicates that they may have breached the consumer standards. So we currently have a requirement that private registered providers must do this. This standard puts local authority landlords on a par. They must also make referrals to us if they identify any breaches or potential breaches of the standards. Then if we come on to the neighbourhood and community standard, so here we have requirements on maintenance of shared spaces around the homes where landlords operate. So these spaces aren't like communal areas. They're not the areas where landlords have a legal responsibility, but these shared spaces, tenants use them. And we think that by working cooperatively with others, so the local authority and other landlords in the area, that they can help to resolve any estate management issues that might arise, to make sure that areas remain safe and well maintained. As I mentioned, communal areas, that they are legal responsibility of landlords, and they have requirements about landlords maintaining them are in the safety and quality standards. So we haven't lost them, they are still captured. Then we have some expectations around local cooperation requirements, and this is about landlords more broadly working with other partners in a local area. So again, local authorities, other landlords, other agencies. And what we're saying here is that this will be different for different providers. Some providers will have a small number of homes in an area, some providers will have many homes in an area. So we're saying here that landlords should take into account their presence, the views of their tenants, what their objectives are as an organisation when setting, what role they should have in the different neighbourhoods that they operate within. We also have requirements relating to safer neighbourhood. So these relate to primarily to antisocial behaviour. And so here we, as we do in our existing standards, we still have an emphasis that landlords should work to deter and tackle antisocial behaviour and support, those residents that are affected by it. And we've also introduced within these requirements an expectation that landlords have an approach for dealing with hate incidents where they occur. And then finally, in this standard, we're introducing some requirements around domestic abuse. So the Social Housing White Paper, the Social Housing Regulation Act, and us, we recognise that landlords do have a role to play in supporting tenants who experience domestic abuse. And so we expect landlords to have a policy, have an approach to how they will do this and how they will support tenants. And then the final standard is the tenancy standard. As I say, we currently have a tenancy standard, so we've worked to update this. And so this standard recognises the importance of, allocation schemes for providing those who need social housing with fair access to that housing, and it requires, housing associations and local authorities to work together on that aim. We've aimed to make it clearer to landlords what the requirements are around, ensuring that they've taken into account tenants' needs, but also recognising that, they have a role to make best use of the homes that they manage. And so we've included a proposal around, adapted homes and purpose-built homes, and ensuring that as much as possible those homes go to those that need them, for example. We've got some requirements relating to the effective tenancy management in terms of the sustainment of tenancies. And so we understand, that this remains a really important protection measure for tenants, particularly at the current times in terms of the economic challenges that tenants and landlords are facing. So we've kind of emphasised the importance of tenancy sustainment, and giving it greater prominence to that and ensuring that landlords support tenants to maintain their tenancies wherever possible. But it does also recognise that there are times when, the ending of a tenancy or a licence is necessary. And so where this is the case, we expect providers to provide tenants with timely advice about their options for moving. Then a large part of the tenancy standard relates to requirements on tenure. So this relates to the type of tenancy that your landlord issues you and how that tenancy is managed. So this is one of those areas where government set the policy and, we have requirements in our standards. So we are waiting for government to set new policy on tenure. So the current requirements that are in the proposed consumer standards are requirements from 2012. But as I say, these are one of the areas that will be updated when we have new policy from government. But one of the areas where we have had new policy from government is on mutual exchange. So they consulted on requirements on mutual exchange earlier this year. And so we've reflected these requirements in our standards. And this is about, ensuring that tenants that are eligible to mutual exchange are made aware, have accesses to the support and the systems to enable them to try to mutual exchange their homes where possible. And we've also added an additional requirement that expects, landlords to provide tenants with information about the implications of mutual exchange. It's not always straightforward in terms of, what that will mean in terms of your rent, your service charges, etc. So we expect landlords to provide tenants with that information so that it's clear. So now moving on to the draft code of practice. We now have a power to issue a code of practice that came through the Social Housing Regulation Act. We didn't have that power before, which is why we haven't had one before, but now we do. And so we are consulting on the draft. And this code of practice is there to help landlords, help tenants understand how they might achieve compliance with the standards. So, once we've gone through the consultation, we would hope to publish this consultation at the same time of the standards. And it gives examples of how landlords might achieve compliance with requirements. And so the examples that we've given, are quite broad, hopefully can apply to all the different types of landlords that are registered with us. But as mentioned, our standards are outcome focused. So we're looking at, what the outcome is. And so, the examples we give, we're not expecting tenants to follow them specifically. We expect them to achieve the outcome in a way that suits them as a provider and suits tenants. So these are just examples. And so, we don't go into lots of great detail in the code of practice. We don't define everything that's in the standards. We just try to provide examples and, ensure that the code of practice is helpful to providers and to tenants on certain areas where we think that would be best. In terms of the consultation then, so we have the 4 draft consumer standards that I've just talked about. We have a code of practice. We also have some impact assessments. So we have the equality impact assessment and a regulatory impact assessment. So, all of these documents are now published on our website, and we're asking 9 questions in our consultation for people to respond to. You can respond to 1 question, you can respond to all questions, but we encourage everyone to kind of have a look and have a go at responding if they would like to share their view with us. It's been a 12-week consultation, but we're now, from tomorrow, moving into the final 2 weeks. The consultation closes on the 17th of October, and we really encourage, as I say, people to respond if they'd like to share their views. And you can do that online. So we've got an online survey. You could do that by email, sharing your views that way, or you could do it in writing and post your response into us. We've also provided the consultation in different formats. So we have it in a plain English format, and we also have it in an easy read summary and questions in the easy read format. And so that's for people who have difficulty reading or a learning disability, to help them work through the consultation. But these summarise the full document. As I say, we've got a full consultation document, so we would encourage, where possible, people to also work through that. We also, as I've mentioned, asking about the code of practice. So please also in that consultation tell us if you feel that the code of practice is helpful. And even if you largely agree with our proposals, we're still keen to hear from you and hear your views. Just to also mention that the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities has recently launched a consultation. So they have launched a consultation about the provision of information to tenants on tenants' rights and how to make a complaint. These requirements will form part of our consumer standards from next year. So it's not something we can consult on, it's something that government consults on. So if you have an interest in that, I would encourage you to go on the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities website and have a look at that consultation also. And then finally, this slide just kind of sets out our next steps. As I say, the consultation closes on the 17th of October. Once we've got all those responses in, we will work through them, do some analysis, set out how we have taken those views on board to make changes to our proposed consumer standards of code of practice, and we will publish what we call a decision statement that sets out the changes that we made early next year. And then as I've mentioned, from April next year we will have a new set of consumer standards in place to support our new approach to consumer regulation. So that was everything I wanted to say about the standards. So I've talked a lot and I'd like to thank you all for listening. But if you do have any comments or questions that you'd like to put to me or Fleur, please, now is the time to do it. So thank you. I will stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Mila. A very thorough presentation around the topic areas of the new standards. We've had a number of questions posted in the chat, so I'm going to come to these first of all before I invite any further questions. We've got about 15 minutes to take questions, so hopefully we'll be able to get through a fair amount. I'm going to come to Anne Ambrose first, who's posed a question about the health and safety standards and their relation to communal areas. Anne, do you want to maybe expand on the question a little bit?
Yeah, hello, sorry. I was looking at my question. I think basically, and this I'm just doing my video a minute. Hi, so basically this actually occurred yesterday, where we've got quite a large tall block which is surrounded by concrete pavements, and as we were walking along, one of my friends almost fell over them, and when we looked, every one of those paving stones were unlevel and they were wobbling like crazy. And so that was why I posed that question. That is specifically something that something that belongs to my landlord. And then I've had instances just recently where there's been incidents in local community centres, shutters not working, toilets leaking that could cause slips and stuff like that. So I just wanted to make sure that this standard is not just about the safety in our homes, but a safety about the services in these places that my landlord provides.
So in terms of communal areas, landlords do have a legal responsibility for the safety of those areas, and that is something that comes under our regulation. But as I mentioned in the presentation, we have a very defined role in legislation in relation to social housing. So in terms of community areas, community centres, there may be other regulations that whoever is responsible for those will have to meet. But in terms of our role as a regulator, these standards apply to the social homes and the communal areas of social homes. That makes sense.
Right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to come to Colin Lincoln next. And Colin, you were asking a series of questions essentially about how the regulator will go about regulating compliance, and will they be publishing the results of those regulatory inspections, so to say, and how will tenants find out about outcomes? Do you maybe again want to expand on your question, or ask something specific?
On that question, the meetings that I've been to with the regulator saying that they would consult tenants, how will the regulator or how will tenants know that the regulator is actually scrutinising their particular landlord? And if the regulator is going to speak to tenants, first, will they know when the regulator is actually scrutinising the landlord, and how will the regulator then choose a tenants or groups to actually, speak to them about things that they feel need looking at? That's the basics of it.
So if I'll take this one. So will tenants know that the regulator is sort of inspecting their provider? I think we've thought about this a lot. I think the first thing is, it would be great if providers could tell their tenants we were on site and we were inspecting. If we were to regulate for it, that would mean we would have to check and enforce against it, and we don't have a standard that, around that.
Sure.
What we want to see is a regulatory regime where it doesn't matter if we're inspecting your provider or not, your provider is delivering services which are compliant with our standards. So where our thinking is going is that we want to hear from tenants when things aren't going right for a group of tenants. We want to hear about that. And if we were to say we only want to hear about that when we're on site, it would kind of undermine our regulation. So we want to hear about that all the time, whether we're on site or not. So that's the first part of your question about on site. The other thing was around when we're doing an inspection, how we're going to speak to tenants. So this is something that we are still thinking about, and we're trying lots of different methods of doing this in our pilot inspections. So we've had 7 or 8 pilot inspections so far. We've got 4 more coming up across a range of different providers. And we're experimenting with how we hear from tenants when we're on site. And where we are landing is that for our inspections, we will want to observe how landlords are delivering the function around tenants having meaningful opportunities to scrutinise and influence decision making. And we want to see that, and we want to understand that. We want to speak to tenants who are involved in that process to get their independent, unmodified opinion as to whether that's working or not. Do they get to independently scrutinise? Do they get the information they need in a timely, accurate, relevant, understandable format? All of those things. And then when we've got concerns about a service area where we think a landlord isn't delivering services to a standard we expect, we will want to speak to tenants who are receiving that service, and we will want to speak to them independent of the landlord and get their honest view so that we can use that in our consideration. We can triangulate against all the other information we have from a provider. The challenge we're always going to have as a regulator is that we don't have a direct relationship with tenants. We don't have a mailing list of 4 million households to say, we see that you're with X landlord, can we talk to you? We will always need to rely on providers, but we are looking at how do we make that work? How do we hear authentic, unfiltered voices? And we're very aware of issues around, coaching or, we're very keen to hear that independent voice, and we are sort of aware of the issues that you've outlined in your comments.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to come to some of the hands up now. I'm coming to Teresa Reid, first of all.
Hi, just an extension of that previous question with regards to inspections. Something that should definitely be considered is how consultation or even acknowledgement of whether the landlord is maintaining standards is happening. That's often falling through the cracks is street properties, because even now that my landlord has been moving from the Almo to in-house provision of maintenance, etc., street property voice is something that I keep asking, how are we going to do that? Because I live in a street property that is also a multi-dwelling street property. So it's a single house, but it's divided into 4 flats, which is made up of 2 local authority tenants and 2 leaseholders, one of which is a live-in leaseholder and the other one is an absentee landlord leaseholder. So a voice does need to be there to be able to represent. And all I keep getting back is, oh, well, we've tried before, but there hasn't been too much uptake. And I'm saying, well, I'm telling you that as a member of a street property, I pay into the tenants fund, which supports tenants associations and so on. We don't need a tenants association in the way that they are run because we don't have the numbers.
Mila or Fleur, do you want to respond to the issue specifically relating to street properties and the sometimes absence of voice that residents on street properties have compared to residents on large estates where there's more formalised structures of representation and voice? I think that's the central point of what Teresa was angling at.
Yeah, thanks, Blaise and Teresa. I think it's really important to understand that our standards apply universally to all types of social housing, including, you know, estates, tower blocks, street properties. I think our standards are clear that we expect landlords to seek out views from tenants, respond to views from tenants, listen to tenants. As an outcome-focused regulator, and sort of in light of our co-regulatory approach, so we won't be kind of inspecting every property, we won't be assessing how each property, each person living in their home, how they've been individually consulted or involved, but we'll be looking at how the provider can demonstrate to us that they are doing that and they are seeking out those voices. And importantly, the standards also include requirements around continual sort of seeking good practice on this. So it wouldn't be enough for a provider to say, this is our approach, we think it's really good, the end. We would be looking for, this is our approach, we think it's really good, here's how we keep in touch with good practice, here's how we ask tenants if this approach is working and effective. There's no silver bullet, but hopefully there's enough in the standards. And do read them and respond. And if you think there's something missing, please do include that. Please do let us know.
Thank you. I've got time for 2 more questions, I think, and I've got 2 hands up. I'm going to come to Nigel first.
How, in the first instance, can you deal with the fact that, you know, if you've got a housing cop that seems to be completely oblivious of these consultations, how on earth, you know, how can you know what's going on? Okay.
Thank you, Nigel. Fleur, do you want to take that, or do you want me to take it, seeing as it's about co-ops? But anyway.
I mean, we can both do it. I think, you know, thank you, Nigel, for feedback. And I think it's a shame that this stuff is not being, you know, it's not reaching you for whatever reason. We are, you know, when we did so we've done the consultation on tenant satisfaction measures. We had a really strong response from tenants, the strongest we've ever had, sort of over 600 responses from individual tenants. And I'm really determined that we'll beat that with this consultation response. Over the course of developing these standards, we've spoken to over 2,000 tenants in their development. We can't reach everyone, and we do rely on our networks. We rely on our national tenant organisations to kind of reach out into their networks and sort of word of mouth try and reach people. But it's, you know, it's something that we're aware of, that, you know, there's no point in having consultation if people don't know about it, I suppose. But Blaise, do you want to take the bit about?
Well, I mean, I think it's particularly worrying that somebody that's sitting on the board of a registered provider, as Nigel is, I mean, you're a committee member of a co-op, you're a board member of a registered provider. It's particularly worrying if somebody in your organisation that this information is coming to is not feeding that through to board members. I think it's also concerning more broadly that that landlords are not informing their tenants as a matter of course about what's going on and what they're required to do. But I am I am concerned that, you know, specifically as a board member of a co-op, that whoever this information is coming to in your co-op, because it is coming to somebody, is not then disseminating that information, you know, to board members. And I'll happily pick that up separately offline with you if you want a further conversation about that, Nigel. I'm going to come to Paul Teal next, please.
Thanks, Blaise. What sort of recommendations are being given out to deal with for a specific approach to dealing with hate incidents?
Mila, do you want to take what?
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to guide the line. So we haven't given specific kind of advice or recommendations about how providers should deal with hate incidents, but we are setting it as an expectation. We recognise that there more tailored interventions might be needed around hate crime as opposed to you know, antisocial behaviour, and so we would expect kind of providers to kind of identify different mechanisms for working towards deterring hate crime.
And just to add to that, the tenant satisfaction measures I think for the first time, we ask providers when they're reporting on the number of ASB cases per 1,000 property, we ask them to pull out the number of hate incidents within that. So for the first time, we're going to have like a record of a sort of national picture of that as well.
So thank you very much to Mila and to Fleur for the presentation, but also for fielding those questions. I'm going to come next to our third speaker, our second or third speaker, I suppose, whichever way you view it. But John Harris is going to give us a resident's perspective and a perspective from the organisation that he chairs, which is the Cornwall Housing Tenants Forum. Over to you, John. Thank you.
Thank you, Blaise. Yes, my name's John Harris, and I chair the Cornwall Housing Tenants Forum. Cornwall Housing is an ALMO. Our landlord is Cornwall Council, which is a unitary council. So it incorporates all council housing in the county of Cornwall. Which is about 10,500. So it's not a huge one, but sort of middling, I suppose. We've been working on this particular consultation as a forum for a couple of months now. As soon as it came out, I got a copy and read through it, and I've probably read through it dozens and dozens of times. More generally and historically, our forum have undertaken quite a few consultations, including the green paper, which came before the white paper. We worked as a forum on the green paper, and at first some of our officers said, "Oh, you only need to answer 2 or 3 questions, and these are the questions you should answer." And we said, "Thank you very much," but we answered all of the questions. Then we did another number of consultations. Nigel was saying that he didn't know anything about consultations. If you sign up to the government in the website, you will get the consultations sent to you constantly. There's a lot of consultations, and you can choose or not to do them. We do pick and choose ours because you want to do it properly, and it does take a bit of time. Back to this consultation. Broadly speaking, we mostly agree with the 4 standards and their requirements, because if you do this consultation, you will find it can be a little bit confusing, because each of the standards is broken down into proposals, and each proposal has requirements which they have to sort of adhere to, and there's other sort of smaller sections. So in the end, you're doing a big bit of work on each separate one, if you choose to do that. I mean, you can do just one if one that really sort of catches your eye. We started really that with a comment, because on the language, terms and language which was being used throughout the consultation. For example, they use the terms reasonable, appropriate timescales, timely manner, aims. None of these are particularly forceful, and we really think that they're ambiguous. You know, so an aim is not a commitment; it's an aspiration. Timely manner. What's timely? My timely might be different to their timely. So all these different ambiguous terms are open to interpretation by the housing provider, by ourselves, I suppose. So we prefer to see unambiguous terms used. So I think they need to go through this whole document, the whole consultation, and weed out the ambiguous terms and put some definite, you know, a timescale. Give a real timescale. You know, don't give a name, give a commitment. Sounds a bit sort of heavy, but the new standards I felt actually key in with what our forum has been doing since the beginning of the year, really, because we all knew that the regulation bill would become an act at some point this year, which it did in July, and we on our forum knew that we had to be ready and prepared for this, probably more so than our housing provider. To do this, we went back and changed our terms of reference, changed the emphasis on what our forum would do, which our body of tenants does, I should say. We're now much more proactive. They didn't like the word in our terms of reference scrutiny, because there is a scrutiny panel. So what we changed that to investigate. What it means is we now monitor much more heavily. We look at things in a much more critical way. And to be fair, we are given access to the tenant satisfaction measures, all the key performance indicators, any kind of data which we feel is relevant, such as complaints, how they're handled, how they are presented. That's all that kind of thing is now we're much more proactive with doing that, and that's all down to the new Regulation Act, the TSMs, and probably this consultation when this comes to fruition in next year. Is it April? All these new standards will apply, and it will give tenant bodies such as our forum the tools necessary to really make a difference with our housing provider, and it should be the same across the country. I can go on because we've answered all the questions, even though there was a couple at the end, 8 and 9, which was a bit more involved. I think it's more directed towards the housing providers. The draft regulatory impact assessment and the draft equality impact assessment. Both assessments are online. You can download them. They are pretty heavy reading, but it's well worth reading them. And we've given our responses to both of them. I mean, I'm happy to send that to anybody else if they wanted to see them, but I won't bore you with all our answers. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you all very much. I hope that you've enjoyed today's session. We've certainly had some great feedback from many of you through the session, and some really interesting questions raised as well, and comments within the chat area. I'm going to hand over to Helen now for the closing remarks. Helen.
If you want to look up any more information, I don't know if you're familiar with our website, there's lots of information, advice and guidance around different issues to do with residents' rights on there. So do take some time, 4millionhomes.org.uk to have a look through that. Our next webinar is on the 25th of October. Again, we always run an afternoon and an evening session, and that's going to be on complaints. We're going to have speakers from the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities at that. We're going to have some resident perspectives, and we're in contact with the Ombudsman as well about that. So that's available for booking on our website now. So if you're interested in coming to that, please do. And we're currently running our in-person trainings. Obviously, I've seen some of you at some of those. They're taking place at the moment in Birmingham, Leeds, Liverpool and London. And the ones in October and November are on residents' associations and social housing legal requirements. And last month we piloted kind of running those sessions online, because we got feedback from some people that because of train strikes or work or things, they couldn't necessarily make the in-person training. So we ran the first two online, and that was really successful. So we're going to schedule in the rest of the training modules also online. So if that works better for you to attend, keep an eye out. We'll send a newsletter as soon as we've pinned down details of those. And in November, we're going to be launching our training content as click-to-view training videos that can be watched and kind of taken in anywhere at any time that you like. So we're really trying to kind of push out that training content in as many ways and as many forms as possible. And as always, we have a resident sounding board that is a group of people who are interested in being involved in having that little bit more say into kind of the contents of our webinars, what we've got going on in the programme, that voice for us to bounce back and check that we're really responding to what residents want to see. So if you would like to join that, just drop me an email, info@4millionhomes.org, and I can add you to that. I am going to now show just one slide. What would be really great, we have an evaluation after each session, and what would be really amazing, it's only a couple of minutes. I'm going to share the link to it now, the QR code to it now. If people have their phones available and can just scan the QR code and just take 2 minutes now to sort of fill that in. And the reason we're doing it kind of online is because we're getting lots of feedback from the training sessions where people fill it in immediately, but not quite as much for the webinars. And we really want to see if those are kind of what residents want, if there's any suggestions that you have. So that is that's the evaluation survey QR codes. So yeah, if you've got your mobile phones, if you're on your computer and you've got your mobile phones, you can just like hold the camera up to that and it will scan it for you. Otherwise, I'm just going to say, I'm going to leave this up for a couple of minutes. Otherwise, I'm just going to say thank you so much for attending. It's been really brilliant to have you all here, and look forward to seeing you at another activity at another point. And of course, as always, if you've got any questions, just get in touch and we're happy to answer them.